He said he never really believed in those old stories about prayer warding off evil, about light repelling shadow, about faith being a kind of closed door. To him, it all always seemed like superstition from frightened people. Until the presence in the room began. At first, it was just that uncomfortable feeling of being watched, that slight pressure on the back of his neck that makes you turn your head too quickly, expecting to find someone. But you don't. Then came the cold, not the usual cold, of the early morning, but an ice that seemed to rise from inside the mattress and climb up his body as if it had form, intention, direction. And when he prayed, curiously, it lessened. It didn't disappear, but it receded, like an animal touched by light. But on one particular night, tired, revolted, exhausted, he simply stopped praying. And that's when he understood why his grandmother always said that some things only need silence to enter. The room became heavy too quickly, as if the air had thickened, gripping his lungs with each breath. The darkness seemed to move, not like an ordinary shadow, but like deep water rippling in slow motion. The presence, which had previously watched from afar, now drew closer. It sat beside him on the bed. He felt the weight sink into the mattress, felt the fabric tug slightly, felt something breathing too close to his ribs. It wasn't wind, it wasn't imagination. It was warmth, it was intention, it was proximity. He closed his eyes instinctively, but realized it was worse. With his eyes closed, the room seemed full of movement, full of low murmurs, almost words, almost conversations, almost as if something celebrated the fact that he had finally given up the only barrier he still had. When he opened his eyes, he saw nothing, but the air was distorted, as if someone standing beside the bed occupied too much space, stole too much light, breathed too close, and the presence smiled. He didn't see the smile. He felt it. He said that night, when he stopped praying, something immediately changed in the room, as if the darkness had waited years for that moment. The presence not only grew stronger, it became conscious. It was as if, before, it had only touched the edges of reality, testing, probing, observing. But the silence he created by abandoning prayer opened a space that shouldn't exist, and the thing filled that space hastily, like someone finally granted permission to enter a room they'd been watching through the keyhole for too long. The air became so heavy that breathing seemed to require physical effort. The yellow lamp, tilted in the corner of the room, flickered as if something were passing in front of it, blocking not only the light, but the heat as well. And when the lamp finally went out, the darkness wasn't just dark, it was dense, palpable, filled with a muffled sound reminiscent of breathing, but breathing too slow to be human. He tried to sit up, but his body was too heavy, as if invisible hands held his, shoulders against the mattress. The room was completely silent, but the silence seemed to come from inside his head, muffling even the sounds of the street, as if the presence were shaping his senses so that nothing external would interfere with the moment. He called out softly. He didn't know exactly what he was calling, perhaps his mother's name, perhaps God's name, but the voice itself seemed to vanish before it left his mouth, as if swallowed by air. And then something that had never happened before occurred. The presence responded, not with words, not with whispers, but with movement. The mattress sank beside him. Slowly, as if a heavy body were sitting there, carefully, intentionally. He felt the weight displace the air, felt the bed tilt, felt the sheet pull slightly toward whatever it was, and then something touched his arm. It wasn't a human hand. There was no human warmth. It was a light touch, but structured, as if fingers too long, too thin, were merely testing the texture of his skin, marking territory. He tried to pull his arm back, but the touch moved up his shoulder, around his neck, so slowly it seemed like an intimate, almost affectionate gesture. Except there was no affection there. There was recognition. The presence was learning his body. He closed his eyes reflexively, but that only made things worse. Because with his eyes closed, he could feel something he couldn't see. The presence was leaning over him. The weight on the mattress shifted. Something brought his face close to his, so close that he felt the air gently stir the hairs on his arm. It was as if the creature was observing every micro-expression, trying to understand how a human reacts to pure fear. And it liked it. He realized this when the room grew even colder, as if the air trembled with satisfaction, because the presence fed on silence, on giving up, on exactly what he had done by stopping praying. He tried to speak again, now asking for help from whoever it was, but something held his voice inside his throat, as if invisible fingers descended down his trachea and squeezed it from the inside. The only thing he managed was a short, broken breath. And then, for the first time, he heard a clear sound. 3 knocks on the wall. They weren't coming from inside the house. They were coming from inside the room. Low, rhythmic taps, as if someone were pressing their knuckles against wood, testing its resistance. Then 3 more, then 2 more, then a slow, scratchy drag, like long fingernails running along the wall behind the bed. He froze, and the presence responded to his panic as if it were music, coming closer, pressing harder, enveloping more. He opened his eyes because he felt something warm fall on his face. He thought it was water, but the taste was metallic, strange. He looked up and saw nothing. Except the nothing was wrong. The darkness above him seemed to thicken, pulsate, change shape. As if the presence were on the ceiling, watching him hanging upside down. He saw no face, he saw no body, but he saw 2 darker spots within the larger shadow, like eyes that didn't reflect light, but absorbed it. The eyes didn't blink, they simply existed, trapped within him, drawing him from the inside, and then, the instant the presence moved across the ceiling, gliding as if it had no bones, he finally understood the worst part. The thing wasn't gaining strength because he had stopped praying. It was taking shape, as if prayer had prevented physical manifestation, as if it had spent years waiting for him to become vulnerable enough for it to begin building an entire body inside the room. Every minute without prayer was a new piece, a new limb, a new breath. He hadn't just stopped praying. He had unknowingly begun to allow the room to become its body. When he tried to get up, the mattress sank harder, holding him down. The sheet rose on its own, sliding down his legs like cold water. The presence seemed to test the space, as if it could take over the entire bed. And then the whole house became so silent that the silence turned to noise. He heard, coming from the corner of the room, a word, not whispered, not spoken, thought, but not by his mind. "Now I enter." And the entire room breathed along with the voice. He said that when he heard that phrase inside his head, "Now I enter," he didn't just feel fear, he felt invasion. It was as if someone had sat in the chair of his mind without asking permission, opening drawers, turning on lights he himself had turned off, rummaging through old memories that hadn't been used for years. The room became so heavy that the air seemed to descend, as if the ceiling had lowered a few centimeters. The presence, which until then seemed only to observe, spread. He felt a different kind of pressure, starting at his feet, rising up his legs like icy water rising in a dark well. It wasn't physical, but his body reacted as if it were. His heart raced, but his chest felt closed. His arms felt heavy, but he was sure that if he could look from the outside, he would see his body still, motionless, like someone sleeping peacefully. Inside, however, it felt like he was trapped in a falling elevator, without floor, without walls, only with that voice repeating in echo, "Now I enter, now I enter, now I enter." He tried to think of anything he had learned in childhood, prayers, verses, sayings from his grandmother, anything that sounded like protection. But it was as if his head were full of cotton, stifling the words before they could take shape. The most frightening thing was that the presence didn't try to block his faith with anger, but with calm, as if caressing his thoughts, diverting, distorting, pushing away anything that could resist. "You don't need this," the voice whispered, sweet, almost affectionate. "You've stopped, remember, keep going." And every time he thought of praying, a weight descended on his tongue, on his chest, on his mind, as if someone were filling the room with dark water. The shadows began to accumulate in a specific corner, near the door, gaining thickness, gaining height, gaining form. It was no longer just a feeling that someone was there. It was almost an outline, almost a body, almost someone standing looking directly at the bed. He realized that the thing wanted something very clear. It wanted him to accept that at some point, even weakly, he would murmur, "It's okay. I can't take it anymore. Do whatever you want." Any phrase of surrender would serve as a key, and since he didn't say anything, the entity began to change its strategy. It approached through memory. First, it came with affection. It showed him old scenes in his head, moments of joy, childhood, people he loved. Everything seemed so vivid that he almost forgot he was lying in a dark room with something sitting beside him, until the images began to distort. His mother's smiling face melted like dripping ink. His father's embrace became an empty arm, encircling nothingness. Friends, romances, parties, everything was swallowed by a dark stain in the corner of his memory, the same stain that was now growing on the wall near the door. "You are alone," the presence murmured inside him without hurrying. "No one sees, no one hears, no one enters, only me." And the worst part, he began to believe it. That's when his body reacted in a way he never forgot. The presence tried to fit in. He felt as if something was trying to clothe his body from the inside. First, his entire chest tingled, as if millions of tiny needles were tracing an outline. Then, the back of his neck suddenly grew cold, so icy that his eyes watered. His right arm rose a few centimeters, without him having commanded it. It wasn't a spasm, it wasn't nervousness, it wasn't fright. It was a conscious movement, only not his own, as if someone had put their hand inside a glove, as if his body were borrowed clothing. His arm hovered in the air, trembling, and he felt such profound panic that he almost fainted. The presence seemed irritated by the resistance. The room sank further into darkness, and something whispered, "I can make you stop feeling. Just let me." At that moment, he said he understood what was worse than being afraid. It was losing the will to fight, because the entity didn't just want to scare him. It wanted to exhaust him. It wanted to make him reach that point where you think, it doesn't matter. The moment his arm rose again, now firmer, a memory burst forth like a scream cutting through water. He saw himself as a child, kneeling beside the bed, repeating a prayer taught by his grandmother, understanding nothing but feeling peace. He didn't remember the exact words, only a crooked, disjointed beginning, and it was precisely this jumbled beginning that escaped his lips. A crooked, stammered, low phrase. The presence reacted as if it had received a shock. His arm fell instantly. The mattress trembled. The dark corner of the door contracted, as if something had shrunk with disgust. "Don't talk to him," the entity growled inside his mind, now without a mask, without sweetness. "You were silent, remember? Stay like that." He tried to continue the prayer, but he couldn't remember the rest. The words became jumbled, stumbling over each other. Even so, he tried. It didn't come out beautifully, it didn't come out strongly. It came out weak, soiled with fear, full of mistakes. but it came out. And it was the first time he realized it wasn't him who was trapped in the room with that presence. It was the presence that was trapped there with him, as long as he still had a voice, will, breath. The darkness stirred again, irritated. The weight on the mattress receded a few centimeters. The air became thinner for a moment, as if opening temporary cracks for breath. He felt a small spark of courage ignite in his chest. Tiny, ridiculous, almost nothing. But the entity felt it too, and hated it. The voice returned. This time deeper, more profound, wider, as if coming from the floor, the ceiling, the walls all at once. You stopped praying. You are already mine. The phrase echoed so much that it seemed like a sentence already signed, and for a second he almost believed it. Almost. But his arm didn't move again. His body was still his. His breath was still his. The room was still part of the house, and the house was not yet entirely his. He realized, terrified, that he was in the middle of a struggle, not for space, for dominance. Each night he fell silent. The presence grew. With each minimal effort to pray, to remember, to call upon what is light, the thing receded a little. It didn't disappear, but it receded. And that was enough for a decision to be born within him, even trembling. The next night he would not remain silent. But the presence heard this thought and laughed. A laugh that wasn't made of sound, but of sensation, like iron scraping against the bones, as if to say, try. Now tell me, have you ever felt that precisely on the days you stop praying, everything seems heavier, stranger, darker? Do you think this is just a coincidence? Or is something listening to the silence? Comment below what you've already experienced, and if you want the continuation of this story, when he decides to confront the presence head-on, leave a like and subscribe, because in the next part, the thing is no longer content to stay by the bedside. It tries to enter through the last remaining door, inside the mind.